UK's plan to recognise Palestinian state. US announces 15% tariff on South Korean goods. Good afternoon and salam Malaysia Madani. This is World Today. I'm Sahih. Prime Minister Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim has expressed appreciation to President Prabowo Subianto for Indonesia's strong support for Malaysia's ASEAN Chairmanship as both leaders reaffirmed their commitment to ASEAN unity and relevance amid rising geopolitical tensions. The message was conveyed during the 13th annual consultation between the two leaders held in Jakarta, where both reaffirmed ASEAN's role as a key platform for regional cooperation. A joint statement issued by Malaysia's Foreign Ministry said that both leaders underscored the need for ASEAN to stay relevant, united and proactive in addressing regional and global challenges, while advancing integration to secure peace, stability and prosperity in the region. On the situation in Myanmar, the leaders expressed deep concern over the continued violence and humanitarian crisis and reaffirmed their commitment to the 5-point consensus as ASEAN's main framework in resolving the political impasse. On Palestine, Prabowo and Datuk Seri Anwar stressed the urgency of global collective action to reach a just and lasting solution, calling for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire in Gaza. Canada is planning to recognise a Palestinian state at the United Nations General Assembly in September. Prime Minister Mark Carney highlighted that the dramatic policy shift is necessary to preserve hopes of a two-state solution to the conflict. Elaborating further on the matter, Carney said his decision was informed by Canada's long-standing belief in a two-state solution to decades-long Israeli-Palestinian conflict. He noted that the possibility of a two-state solution is being eroded before everyone's eyes. He referenced Israel's ongoing failure to prevent humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza amid its war against Hamas, as well as the expansion of illegal settlements in the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem. For decades, Carney said it was hoped that a two-state solution would be achieved as part of a peace process built around a negotiated settlement between Israel and Palestine. Regrettably, he said this approach is no longer tenable. With the announcement, Carney positioned Canada alongside France and Britain regarding to recognition of Palestinian statehood. On a related note, Britain has rejected Israeli criticism that it was rewarding the Hamas group by setting out plans to recognize a Palestinian state unless Israel takes steps to improve the situation in Gaza and bring about peace. Prime Minister Keir Starmer's ultimatum setting a September deadline prompted an immediate rebuke from Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu, who said it rewarded the Palestinian group. However, British Transport Minister Heidi Alexander, designated by the government to respond to media questions, said the measure is not a reward for Hamas. She stressed that the recognition is about the Palestinian people and the children that are starving to death in Gaza. Starmer's decision follows that of French President Emmanuel Macron, who announced last week that Paris would recognise Palestinian statehood in September, becoming the first major Western power to do so because of the dire humanitarian conditions in the enclave. Britain would make the move at the UN General Assembly in September unless Israel takes substantive steps to allow more aid into Gaza, make clear it will not annex the West Bank and commit itself to a long-term peace process that delivers a two-state solution. In a related development, Israeli forces killed at least 30 people when they opened fire on a crowd waiting for humanitarian aid in the north of the Palestinian territory. The Israeli military claimed that it had no knowledge of casualties in the incident. However, Gaza Civil Defense spokesman Mahmoud Basal reported that at least 30 people were killed and 300 wounded when Israeli forces opened fire on people waiting for aid north of Gaza City. Mohammed Abu Salmiya, director of Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza City, said his facility had received 35 bodies from the shooting, which reportedly struck about 3 kilometers southwest of the Zakim crossing point for aid trucks entering Gaza. Hours earlier, the Civil Defense Agency said at least 14 Palestinians were killed in 4 other incidents, 3 near 8 distribution sites. Gaza has been in the grip of war for almost 22 months and, according to a UN-mandated report, its 2 million plus residents now face an unfolding famine. Israel's military campaign has killed at least 60,000 and 138 people in Gaza, mostly civilians, since October 2023. Meanwhile, the United Nations Humanitarian Agency said the conditions for delivering aid into Gaza are far from sufficient to meet the immense needs of its desperate, hungry people. It also said fuel deliveries are nowhere near what is needed to keep health, emergency, water and telecommunication services running in the besieged Palestinian territory. This week, Israel launched daily pauses in its military operation in some parts of the Gaza Strip and opened secure routes to enable UN agencies and other aid groups to distribute food in the densely populated territory. However, the UN agency said these pauses alone do not allow for the continuous flow of supplies required to meet the immense need levels in Gaza. For example, for UN drivers to access the Karim Shalom crossing, a fenced-off area, Israel authorities must approve the mission, provide a safe route through which to travel, provide multiple green lights on movement, as well as a pause in bombing, and ultimately open the iron gates to allow them to enter. The agency warned that 4 days into Israel's tactical pauses, deaths due to hunger and malnutrition are still occurring, similar to casualties among those seeking aid. Cambodia's National Assembly Speaker Juan Sudari said the world has enough conflicts without any from the ASEAN region. She expressed appreciation to her country's international allies following the ceasefire with Thailand during the 6th World Conference of Speakers in Geneva. She said peaceful coexistence, especially between neighbours, is essential, saying that Cambodia is committed to the spirit of good neighbourliness of the ASEAN community.
We are grateful to Malaysian Prime Minister, Minister Anwar Ibrahim, for his leadership and for hosting the ceasefire talk. And thank you for all international friends for supporting the ceasefire, which saved the life and the livelihood of the people of the two nations, Cambodian and Thai. I would like to call upon international friends and partners to closely monitor the implementation of the ceasefire, ensuring all parties honor their commitment to completely end the conflict.
To prevent the breach of the ceasefire, she said it is urgent to deploy international observers and inspection teams. In a related development, foreign military attachés from major powers and ASEAN member countries, along with diplomats from 13 countries including the US and China, observed a ceasefire between Thailand and Cambodia that came into effect 2 days earlier. The attachés inspected damage at the closed NSES border checkpoint in Cambodia's Phra Vihear province, which borders Thailand's Ubon Ratchathani. The foreign observers were briefed by Cambodian General Chan Sopehektra in the presence of Thai troops who had previously crossed into Cambodian territory. It comes as Thailand's military accused Cambodian forces of breaching the ceasefire agreement at 3 separate locations along the disputed border, warning that continued aggression could compel Thai forces to respond more decisively. The Cambodian Defence Ministry meanwhile accused Thailand of twice breaching the ceasefire. The allegations come about 2 days after both governments agreed to a ceasefire brokered in Kuala Lumpur. The deal aimed to stop the fighting and prevent escalation of their deadliest conflict in more than a decade, following 5 days of intense clashes that killed at least 43 people and displaced over 300,000 civilians on either side. At least 7 people were killed and 13 injured in an armed attack at a funeral in Guatemala. The incident is linked to gang-related disputes. Guatemala is plagued by the violent rivalry between the Barrio 18 and Mara Salvador Trucha gangs, which Interior Minister Francisco Jimenez blamed as the likely cause of the incident. Jimenez said armed men stormed a funeral home during the wake of Barrio 18 member killed on Monday in the capital Guatemala City. While the wake was taking place, he said rival gang members from Mara Salvatruca stormed the funeral home and fired at the family and friends of the deceased. He added the attackers who arrived on motorcycles fled the scene. Authorities cordoned off the area as forensic teams recovered the bodies. Jimenez said the wake had been considered high risk due to the profile of the deceased and regretted that the police officers assigned to monitor the event had abandoned their post before the attack. He called the situation unacceptable and said the officers would be investigated by the Internal Affairs Unit. He also said if found responsible, the officers will be immediately brought before the courts. Still ahead, millions return home as Pacific tsunami warnings lifted.
Peralatan elektrik 5 bintang memberikan perkhidmatan 5 bintang.
President Donald Trump said the US has decided to charge a 15% tariff on imports from South Korea as part of an agreement with the Asian trading partners that avoids even higher levels. In a post on his Truth Social platform, Trump said the US has agreed to a full and complete trade deal with South Korea. As part of the arrangement, he said South Korea would invest $350 billion in the US in projects selected by Trump and purchase $100 billion of liquefied natural gas and other energy products. It was not immediately clear how the investment deals would be structured or the time frame for their implementations. Trump also said additional investment would be announced later. He added South Korea would accept American products including cars, trucks and agriculture into its markets and impose no import duties on them. The US President also revealed that South Korean President Lee Jae-myung will visit the White House within the next 2 weeks for a meeting with Trump. The 15% rate is below a 25% rate that Trump had threatened earlier. Since returning to the White House in January, Trump has imposed a sweeping 10% tariff on allies and competitors alike, with rates set to increase for dozens of economies on 1st August alongside steeper levels on steel, aluminium and autos. Meanwhile, Trump has ordered a massive tariff on Brazil and sanctions against the judge overseeing a trial of his far-right ally Jair Bolsonaro, who is accused of attempting a coup in Latin America's biggest economy. The announcement of a 50% tariff saw Trump make good on his threat to wield US economic might to punish Brazil and its Supreme Court Justice Alexander de Moraes, in particular for what he has termed a witch hunt against former President Bolsonaro. Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva hit back at the move, saying he would defend the sovereignty of the Brazilian people in the face of measures announced by the US President. The White House said Trump's executive order added a 40% tariff on Brazilian products, bringing total trade duties to 50%. The order said the new tariff rate would not come into effect for 7 days and listed exemptions on some Brazil's major exports, including plains, orange juice and pulp, Brazil nuts and some iron, steel and aluminium products. The new rate was announced shortly after the US Treasury slapped sanctions on Moraes, which followed a similar move by the State Department earlier this month. On a related note, Trump said the US is still negotiating with India on trade after announcing earlier that the US will impose a 25% tariff on goods imported from the country starting tomorrow. The 25% tariff, as well as an unspecified penalty announced by Trump in a morning social media post, would strain relations with the world's most populous democracy. Later at the White House, the president indicated there was room for negotiations.
Well, we're talking to him now. We'll see what happens. Again, India was the highest, or just about the highest tariff nation in the world, and one of the highest, 100 points, 150 points or percentages. So India was one of the highest in the world. They had won 175%, and higher than that. You know, there's another higher one is Canada. Canada has. They've been charging our farmers 200%, 300%, 400% for years, and nobody did anything about it. But India is one of the highest, so we're going to see. We're negotiating with India right now.
Trump, however, did not provide details about the penalty but indicated initially it was for India buying Russian arms and oil and its non-monetary trade barriers. The 25% figure would single out India more severely than other major trading partners and threaten to unravel months of talks between the two countries. The US Federal Reserve has kept interest rates unchanged, defying strong political pressure from Trump to slash borrowing costs. The central bank decided to hold interest rate at a range between 4.25% and 4.50% for a fifth consecutive meeting. The news came amid a flurry of data releases this week, including an estimate showing the world's biggest economy returned to growth in the second quarter. But the uptake was heavily influenced by a pullback in imports after businesses rushed to stockpile inventory in the first quarter ahead of Trump's expected tariffs.
So, as you know, today we decided to leave our policy rate where it's been, where I would characterize as modestly restrictive. Inflation is running a bit above 2%, as I mentioned, even excluding tariff effects. The labor market's solid, historically low unemployment. Financial conditions are accommodative, and the economy is not performing as though restrictive policy were holding it back inappropriately.
It warned, however, that uncertainty about the economic outlook remains elevated, while inflation too is somewhat heightened. Microsoft Azure cloud computing business delivered another quarter of blockbuster growth, powering revenue above Wall Street's expectations. Shares of the software company rose 8% in extended trading after it said Azure sales surpassed 75 billion USD on an annual basis, the first time it has disclosed that figure, beating expectations for $74.62 billion. Microsoft results come after Google said it would spend more on data centers to meet demand for AI services, and Meta projected higher sales with only modest increases in spending. The trio of results could help resolve investor questions about whether big tech is benefiting from its massive data center build-out, with capital spending to reach 330 billion USD this year. Microsoft and Meta results helped fuel a $500 billion gain in AI stocks. Microsoft's cloud business still trails market leader Amazon Web Services, which had a head start in cloud computing and brought in $107.56 billion in its most recent fiscal year. But investors said Microsoft's new revenue figure indicates its investments are translating to increased sales. South Korean tech giant Samsung Electronics operating profit dropped by more than 50% year-on-year in the second quarter as US curbs on AI chip exports to China hit sales. The company reported an operating profit of 3.4 billion USD for the April-June period, marking a 55% decline from a year earlier, and the company's net profit came in at $3.8 billion, marking a 48% year-on-year decline. In a statement, Samsung said that despite significant growth in revenue from the first quarter, earnings for the foundry business remained weak due to the impact of the inventory value adjustment stemmed from US export restrictions on advanced AI chips to China. The company said going into the second half of the year, its foundry business will ramp up mass production. It added that AI demand is expected to remain robust due to continued investment by major cloud service providers, and therefore server demand for both DRAM and NAND is expected to stay strong. The disappointing earnings report comes on the heels of two positive developments: the end of legal jeopardy for its chairman Lee Jae-yong and multi-billion-dollar deal with Tesla. India has launched a 1.5 billion USD first-of-its-kind radar imaging satellite built in collaboration with NASA to help enhance global monitoring of climate change and natural disasters. The NASA ISRO Synthetic Aperture Radar, or NISA satellite, is the first of such collaborations between the Indian Space Research Organisation and US Space Agency NASA. It took off from India's Satish Dhawan Space Centre at 5:40 p.m. local time, marking a milestone in space cooperation and bolstering India's profile in low-cost, high-impact satellite missions. NISAR is the world's first radar imaging satellite to use two radar frequencies to track minute changes in the Earth's surface, including movement as small as a centimeter. The satellite, roughly the size and weight of a fully loaded pickup truck, was placed into a near-polar sun-synchronous orbit approximately 747 kilometers above Earth. It will map the planet every 12 days using a 240-kilometer wide radar swath, offering data to scientists and disaster response agencies to monitor everything from glacier retreat in the Himalayas to potential landslide zones in South America. NISAR is suspected to operate for at least 5 years. Tsunami warnings were lifted across the Pacific Rim, allowing millions of temporary evacuees to return home. After one of the strongest earthquakes ever recorded rattled Russia's sparsely populated Far East, more than a dozen nations from Japan to the US to Ecuador warned citizens to stay away from coastal regions. Storm surges of up to 4 meters were predicted for some parts of the Pacific after the 8.8 quake struck off Russia's Kamchatka Peninsula. But fears of a catastrophe were not realized, with country after country lifting or downgrading warnings and telling coastal residents they could return. In Japan, almost 2 million people had been ordered to higher ground before the warnings were downgraded or rescinded. In the Galapagos Islands, where waves of up to 3 meters were expected, there was a relief as the Ecuadorian Navy Oceanographic Institute said the danger had passed. Russia had also downgraded most tsunami warnings. The country suffered the worst damage as a tsunami crashed through the port of Severodvinsk and submerged a local fishing plant. The initial quake, however, caused limited damage and only light injuries, despite being the strongest since the year 2011, when 15,000 people were killed in Japan. Next up in sports, Shelton and Rublev safely through in Toronto.
Super GT 2025 Series dengan 8 siaran langsung perlumbaan. Pusingan 1, 13 April dibawakan dari Litar Okayama International Circuit. Pusingan 2, 4 Mei dibawakan dari Litar Fuji Speedway. Pusingan 3, 28 Jun dibawakan dari Litar Sepang. Pusingan 4, 3 Ogos. Pusingan 5, 24 Ogos dibawakan dari Litar Fuji Speedway. Pusingan 6, 21 September dibawakan dari Litar Sportsland Sugo. Pusingan 7, 19 Oktober dibawakan dari Litar Autopolis. Dan pusingan 8, 2 November dibawakan dari Litar Mobility Resort Montegi di saluran Sukan RTM. Juga secara penstreaman langsung di RTM Click.
We begin our sports segment with football. A closed-door hearing in the case of Crystal Palace versus UEFA, Nottingham Forest and Olympique Lyonnais will be held on 8th August. Palace were demoted to the third-tier Conference League by UEFA's club financial control body in a multi-club ownership case, while Olympique Lyonnais will be allowed to play in the Europa League. The Eagle Football Group are majority owners of Lyon, while its chairman, John Textor, also owns a controlling stake in Palace. Textor later resigned from Lyon's board of directors, with Michelle Kang appointed chairwoman and president. The London club appealed the decision, with CAS now confirming it will hear the case next month. Nottingham Forest, who finished 7th in the Premier League, will replace Palace in the Europa League if their appeal fails. Palace had qualified for the Europa League by winning the FA Cup last season, while Lyon reached the competition by finishing 6th in League One. However, the French club were allowed to keep their place as they finished higher in their respective league. No ruling is expected on the day, but a decision is anticipated on 11th August. In tennis, Ben Shelton earned his first career win over gritty Frenchman Adrian Manarino, posting a 6-2, 6-3 victory to earn a third-round spot at the Canadian Open. The American fourth seed came to the court with a pair of losses against 37-year-old qualifier Manarino. Shelton broke twice to leave the opening set and cruised to a 5-3 margin in the second. He had to get past a niggle, double faulting in the final game, but saving the ensuing break point and finally clinching the win with a 16-ace, followed by a service winner on match point. Earlier, Andrei Rublev, runner-up in Canada a year ago to Alexei Poprin, won his 250th career match on hard court as he beat France Hugo Gaston 6-2, 6-3. The sixth seed needed 4 match points to advance after 86 minutes. He will next play against Italian Lorenzo Sonego, a 6-1, 6-4 winner over China's Bu Yung-chok Kit. On to the women's draw. Iga Swiatek cruised into the third round of the Canadian Open while Naomi Osaka had to sweat it out and fought off several match points to advance with a 3-set win over Lyudmila Samsonova. Swiatek, seeded second in the tournament, breezed past Chinese qualifier Guo Hanyu 6-3, 6-1, breaking Guo's serve 6 times. She dominated the match with aggressive play, picking up her 8th straight win. Meanwhile, a dramatic second set saw Osaka save 3 match points as she came back to beat Samsonova 4-6, 7-6, 6-3. Samsonova served for the match at 5-4 in the second set and led 40-15. The Russian fight at forehand long on her first match point, and on her second, a lackluster drop short effort gave Osaka an opening and the Japanese star pounced. Samsonova double fault on breakpoint allowed Osaka to level the set, and after storming back in the tiebreaker to force a third set. Osaka took control early, breaking Samsonova twice on the way to victory. In another match, Jessica Pegula began her quest for a third straight Canadian Open title with a straight sets win over Greek Maria Sakkari. The American seeded third claimed a 7-5, 6-4 triumph to set up a round of 32 clash against Latvian Anastia Sevastova. Pegula bagged her 11th straight match victory at the tournament, having lifted the title in Montreal in 2023 before successfully defending her crown last year in Toronto. In cycling, Mauritian Kimberly Lee-Court-Pienaar became the first African to win a stage at the Tour de France Femme with a late push, reclaiming the yellow jersey. Lee-Court, who led the general classification after stage 2 but was overtaken by Marianne Vos, won a breakneck downhill push to the finish, edging 2023 champion Demi Vollering. The fifth stage, the longest in the tour this year, went through a relatively flat terrain before 3 climbs in the final 35 kilometers and saw several failed breakaway attempts as the peloton covered 46.5 kilometers in the first hour despite multiple crashes. Green jersey holder Lorena Wibbs recovered from a crash to rejoin the peloton but struggled to keep up after the first climb, ultimately finishing 58th. Vos, who stayed in the peloton behind a leading group for most of the race, attacked in the final 15 kilometers during the mountainous part of the stage but fell behind during the final uphill push, dropping to 6th in the general classification. Vollering rose to the 3rd overall, while Pauline Ferrand-Prévot moved up to 2nd, sitting 18 seconds behind Lee-Court. The tour continues today with the mountainous 123.7 kilometer ride from Clermont-Ferrand to Ambert. And that wraps up the world today. In our top story, Canada follows France and UK's plan to recognise Palestinian state. Tune in to Malaysia Tonight, coming up at 8:30 p.m. on TV1 and saluran Berita RTM. Till then, I'm Sahih Samsudin, Malaysia Madani, Rakyat, Disantuni. Thank you for watching.